All right, let's just jump into it. All right, my name is Travis Lindsay, professor of entrepreneurship here at Cal State Fullerton, manager for our Center for Entrepreneurship and CSUF Startup Incubator, and a co-founder of a small angel fund called Titan Angels. With me today is Jim Cooper. Jim, introduce yourself, sir.
Hey, Travis. Thanks for having me. I am CTO and of Braid Theory, and we also have Braid Theory Ventures, which is our small fund. And we are an accelerator based in Los Angeles, in San Pedro. And what we look at is kind of more deeper tech, science and engineering, enabling technologies around science and engineering. Some people might call it deep tech, some people might call it frontier tech, but our focus is on two specific areas. One is blue economy and oceans and blue tech. So those are the two areas that we primarily focus on. Because those areas of blue economy and blue tech in particular are focused around science and engineering. It requires us to look more cross-disciplinary because the oceans have everything from food to potential medicines. We look at the oceans for energy. We look for our shipping and logistics needs. So it's quite a diverse environment. One of the main areas that we focus on in our for our accelerator is energy water nexus. So any kind of upstream effects that we can mitigate to prevent ocean pollution or rise in sea levels and climate change, or we look at aspects of the ocean itself, things like fisheries, aquaculture, shipping in general, logistics and supply chain, and how we can use ports in a different way than what we're currently using it right now. So that's kind of our focus. Because it's multidisciplinary, we look at those cross sectors as well. So a lot of things that go into blue tech and blue economy are related to things that we do on Earth, so on the land. So agriculture, life science, aerospace is kind of high in the rankings there as well. So so we look at those kinds of technologies and we apply them in the ocean space.
So yeah, real quick before I get on to you and your work with the CSU system in general, is it still true that we know less about the oceans than we do about space? I mean, I've always heard that. It doesn't seem right, but maybe.
It is true to a certain degree. We don't know a lot of stuff about space, but we know a lot about our immediate neighborhood, and we probably know more about the other planets, with the exception probably of Pluto, than we do about the deep ocean. And there are some engineering reasons why that's the case. While in space you have to deal with vast distances, underwater you need to deal with vast pressures, and that requires engineering that has some real difficulties and can really risk the lives of people who want to go down there and explore the greater depths of the ocean. And while we've got robotics that can do some of that, we still have only mapped about a tenth of the ocean floor, and most of that tenth is in the upper parts of the ocean, the higher parts of the ocean at the continental shelf. So that's where the land connects with the end of the continent, and then the continental shelf drifts off and drops into kind of these large abyss abyssal areas of the oceans. And so we really don't know a whole lot. We don't know a lot of the species that are there. We certainly don't know about a lot of the bacteria, the algae, phytoplankton. We don't know a lot about those things. Viruses, there's more viruses in a cup of water than there is in the equivalent amount of Earth and air. so a lot of those viruses we could use, we could repurpose for therapeutic use. We just don't know. We just have to explore the ocean a whole lot more.
Right. Yeah. So there's just a bunch of unknown unknowns down there, and I mean there could be some sort of like fountain of youth or some other great discovery down there, and we just can't get it.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's so many things that already come from the ocean that we take for granted, that I think we forget how important the ocean is to our survival. You know, you've probably heard that the ocean is like this giant carbon sink, but that's only good until you absorb too much carbon, and then it acidifies the ocean, which then we run into the problems of species loss and, you know, bleaching of coral reefs, which are kind of vital to our survival. And this is a problem that we need to mitigate. When we talk about the technologies that we can get out of the ocean, we've already seen that, you know, for the last 50 years or so, we've had, we've known about how effective hemocyanins are. They are the blue blood that's in things like horseshoe crabs. And we can harvest that blue blood, and we do, for creating better vaccines, helping with drug discovery. And without that, we probably won't have a vaccine for COVID-19. So there are things that are vitally important from the ocean that we get. And besides food, you know, when we get, we do all of our fisheries, most of our fisheries from the ocean. We probably only use estuarine or river fishing for a small amount of our food supply. Most of it comes from the oceans of the world. So yeah, it's really, really important.
So yeah, vitally important. All right, so let's move on. I think, when did we meet? It's been over 5 years now, hasn't it?
At least.
At least. I mean, it feels like decades, Jim.
It can be that way with me sometimes, right?
No. It's just, it's just, you know, the last 3 months feel like 30 years.
That's true too. Yeah.
It's getting to that point now. But you've worked with the CSU system extensively. I mean, up and down. I've heard you extol the virtues of it countless times. I mean, frankly, I think you probably know a hell of a lot more about the whole system than I do. So why do you work with the CSU so much?
There's a couple of reasons. One, I'm a graduate of the CSU system, and I'm actually a graduate of a couple of systems, but the one I think about the most is the CSU system, because I live in California. I recognize some of the problems that some of the students in the CSU system have. They're mainly disadvantaged. A lot of them are disadvantaged students. A lot of them come from homes where they're the first person to go to college. And the CSU system is a good way to advance their economic status from the bottom quartile to closer to the top quartile, and we've been very, very effective in doing that. Just so you know, I volunteer to do all of this. I'm not paid by the CSU, mostly for a lot of the work that I do, occasionally, but not mainly. I work with CSUF, which is a organisation within the CSU that promotes biotechnology and biotechnology research within the 23 campuses of our system. But I've also worked with Cal State Fullerton's Center for Entrepreneurship. Thank you, Travis. And I'm a champion there, and an ambassador. So I do work through most of the CSU Centers for Entrepreneurship. At one point or another, I've worked with them, worked with students, coached and mentored them, and I've taken, I think the count now is 12 teams to ICOR. So, so I enjoy it. I enjoy it because I enjoy the science. I enjoy the entrepreneurship. I enjoy the science and the entrepreneurship together. And and I always talk up the CSUs and how effective we are. It has been made known to me that about 40% of the work that the research that we do in California is done within the CSU system, and it's often not recognised. Certainly not as much as in front of the Berkeleys or the Stanfords or the Caltechs and the UCLAs of the world. But we have our part. A lot of the PhDs that have graduated through universities in California got their start at the Cal State, did their undergraduate degrees at the Cal State School. There are 4 million of us as alumni in the state, which is really actually kind of incredible. So
that's quite a bit. How many people are even in California? What is it, 30?
30 million, yeah.
30, yeah.
Around 30 million. So it's a sizable chunk of alumni, right?
Yeah.
And that's 23 schools. I mean, one of our schools has a ship. Cal Maritime is the smallest campus, and it has a ship. It teaches students in the merchant marine for future merchant marines. So this is a significant national security protection, and we've got it here in the CSU system. So this is nothing to be sneezed at. We have a really strong system, and often we don't get the money that we need in order to run classes, curriculum, help students get beyond just the classroom, and through enrichment activities like CSUF, like what we have at Cal State Fullerton, having an incubator. We often don't get, I think, the resources that we need to fully exploit those advantages that we have. It'd be nice.
It would be nice. Just for the record, I think Cal State Fullerton does have a boat. It may be a sculpture. It's just on the lawn somewhere. It's kind of broken up. It looks great though. I don't think it's very seaworthy. All right, and so you mentioned ICOR. Go into a little bit more depth about that, because I doubt many people listening to this know what we're talking about.
ICOR is a National Science Foundation initiative. It's been around for a while. It helps student teams, particularly in the sciences, create avenues for entrepreneurship. It helps them with their lean canvas. Pushes them through a curriculum of entrepreneurship, of customer discovery, market segmentation, value proposition, ultimately, creating a go or no-go strategy, which allows those teams to advance through. Often it's been talked about as kind of SBIR phase 0. The SBIR is a grant system within the federal government. And so it helps, I think it helps teams, particularly science teams, think about the commercialization process and how they take products to market from kind of that, what I've spoken about before is that the nascent to demand pathway, and that latency, trying to compress that latency is kind of important. And I think that that's an effective way, an effective tool, ICOR, is an effective tool for that to happen. Now, there are several kinds of ICOR programs. In Ohio, for example, it's a state-run program through the NSF. It's kind of unique. But then we also have these sites and nodes. Sometimes the nodes are called the nationals. And that's somewhat true, because the teams come from all over, from every research and not so research institutions all over the country, and it's great. It's really, really good to see kids from, I say kids because they're younger than me, but students from like Temple University or University of Texas, University of Southern Florida, they've got something, or Harvard, and then a Cal State school, and we're all together in the same room, and we're all being grilled about our concept and our technology and how we're going to go to market with it. And so I've been part of the team dynamic is that we have industry advisors, industry mentors, and I've been industry mentor for these teams. Now we have a site program as well, And we have several site programs within the CSU system. We also have a couple of site programs within the UC system. And at USC, they have one of the nodes. So in California, and Berkeley, I think, has one of the nodes too. So we have a couple of nodes in California. We have more higher concentration of the ICOR programs in California than probably any other part of the country. So we're way ahead. So it should be easy, right, to commercialize scientific discovery, correct? There should be no chance for us to...
Not a chance. How much of scientific discovery is actually commercialized? Is it less than 1%?
Probably less than 1%. Now, I mean, that's not to say that we don't see a lot of transfer happening, right. Particularly in the life sciences to the pharmaceutical companies that want to take that R&D and then move it along and turn it into drugs or therapeutic or a medical device or a diagnostic or something, right? We certainly do see a lot of that. But from a spin-off, if you like, perspective, I think we probably see about 1% of the discoveries, yeah. But some of those, you know, when we talk about discovery and scientific discovery, we look at some of these things as not being necessarily commercializable initially. They might be part of a package, a broader package of total scientific discovery. And, you know, I'm not sure that I'd be looking at like the chromosomal numbers of zebrafish as being kind of something that's commercializable, but perhaps in the scheme of things, when we're looking at using a reference biologic like a zebrafish to look at, say, you know, other fish that are in an aquaculture environment, for example, then maybe that might have another impact later on, kind of a downstream effect, if you like. So yeah, about 1% is probably what's
yeah, but you know, I mean, counting the chromosomes on a zebrafish, I mean, that's just something fun to do. That's what I'm going to be doing this Sunday, going down to the dock, you know, finding a zebrafish and
I wish it was that easy.
Pulling out the chromosomes and just, you know, giving them a look-see. But no, I think something that you said there, I think a lot of people overlook this, is that this whole thing is a process. The CSU system, it's part of a process, it's part of a bigger organization, and scientific discovery is as well. So yes, 99+% of scientific discoveries don't get commercialized. You don't see them in the supermarket, you don't see them in supply chains. But without those discoveries, you couldn't get to those, you know, 0.8%.
Yeah, it's an cumulative and cascading effect, yes.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, that's just the way it works. So I know you wanted to talk about a couple of other things while I have you. Remind me, what were some of those things?
Well, we had originally have been having a chat about what startup economies of the future might look like, and and I think the closest that we can probably think about this from a kind of a deep tech or a science, but commercializing scientific discovery perspective would be to look at what I call the Star Trek models of commercialization.
So in every kitchen there's a replicator, and it creates a chicken in the pot.
Exactly. So what does it really mean to have a replicator, and then, you know, use that replicator to turn it into I don't know, Earl Grey.
Let's not use the example we used before we started this interview.
Yes, right. We won't use that one. But Earl Grey Hot, which is kind of something that Captain Jean-Luc Picard says at least in once every episode of Next Generation, right? He goes up to the replicator, he asks the computer to make him a cup of Earl Grey tea that's hot. It comes out and he starts drinking it, and obviously it doesn't affect him. It's not poisonous. We've kind of in the future perfected this this way of creating food that is molecular but assembled molecular. He doesn't go to a cafe. He produces no money for it. So what we're clearly dealing with here is what I would classify as a post-scarcity world.
Right. And so how would that happen? Would it be we would be able to go out and mine asteroids really cheaply, bring in all those resources? I think I just saw a story the other day about how one company had identified an asteroid that has more resources on it than we've ever seen on Earth.
Yeah, that's true. The problem though lies much earlier than this, and that is not so much that we can just produce stuff out of thin air, which is we can actually. We've experimented with this. We have some discoveries that we can actually produce some things out of thin air, but there are other. I guess as an economist and also a biologist, I look at things a little bit differently, and because I think you have to if you're looking at something in a post-scarcity world. There's two areas that I think economically we have to look at first, and one is the idea of decoupling labor from reward, and then our hierarchy. The current way that we have now is these hierarchies that create these disparities. In a post-scarcity world, we won't have a reward system for the labor that we do, unless I'm getting it wrong from Star Trek. If you go up to a replicator and you simply ask a computer to replicate something, then anyone can do it. So at least one of kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, has been fulfilled. That we will have food, and it will be easy for us to get food wherever we want.
Right. Well, even in Star Trek, I mean, there's still hierarchies. There's Captain Jean-Luc. There's
there are, but they're not hierarchies necessarily of disparity. And at least we don't see those. We don't see those coming through unless, of course, you're a Ferengi, right? And the Ferengi have a complex, I would say, a hyper-capitalist system, even worse than what we've got here. But completely unregulated. And we kind of see the kind of, what was one of the expressions was that, a Ferengi would actually sell his grandmother. And that's frowned upon in Star Trek. So clearly we have this, we have hierarchies, yes, but those hierarchies are part of a broader system of I would say that there are more micro hierarchies in the sense that you need to get jobs done, and there needs to be an order of operations coming from a leader in a spaceship. But I don't think that those things necessarily exist back on Earth. I don't see anyone really going to work and working in any shops, because what would be the purpose of a shop if you could just go to a replicator and say, I want a t-shirt?
Yeah, so then you get into questions about if everything was just automatically provided for you, how as a species would you even, or how would the human species respond to that? Because
that's the decoupling of labor and reward. So
yeah.
So creating a different system of kind of turning Maslow on its head, and putting those things that are kind of usually at the pinnacle of Maslow's hierarchy at the bottom of the pyramid, and saying, well, we've got all these other things that are provided, shelter and water and, healthy kind of system environment. And we've learned that these are the most important, not the things that are usually at the pinnacle. And that's what I mean by the hierarchies that create the disparities. And so when we look at this kind of, it's a post-capitalism, because it's not that anyone is going without. At least that's the impression that we get from Star Trek. So what implications does this have for startups? Well, we already see that companies that are constantly drilling down to get to what they classify as a serviceable market, right? I actually have a name for this. It's a name from agriculture. It's called crop rowing. Row crops, monoculture, and we drill down our economy until we get to row cropping monoculture. And we do the same thing with startups. We make them drill down until they've got a serviceable market, until that serviceable market is saturated. And now they have to expand out of that and find new markets for their ideas. I think that we should be exploring these avenues in parallel. So we don't have the kind of monoculture markets, serviceable markets that create these crop growing. And I think that that's actually dangerous. And I know that a lot of investors tell companies to, you know, what's your go-to-market strategy? What's your first market? What's your low-hanging fruit? So I actually believe that there's no low-hanging fruit, that we should be thinking about these things in parallel, because ultimately what they do is it breaks down this hierarchy of disparity. So that satisfies one aspect of this Star Trek economy, right?
Okay, so what's the next aspect of it?
Well, the other aspect, which I don't think we've done, and I think it's more of a social thing, is decoupling the idea of labor and reward. And that means that, you know, a certain number of hours of productivity, you get a certain amount of pay in return. And I don't think that that necessarily happens in Star Trek, for example, because everyone seems to be doing what they're really enjoying doing.
I mean, Tasha Yar might have a quibble with that.
They might, right? But you know, that everyone kind of seems as though they're doing what they're enjoying doing, and they're being rewarded anyway, right? They're satisfied because they have a room. They're satisfied because they have a fulfilling career, and they're fed or they're clothed by going up to a replicator and asking it for the things that they require.
So you're in complete disagreement with the Wachowski siblings. I mean, the Matrix, right? They went through multiple iterations of the Matrix. They tried basically what you're talking about right now, and humanity basically rebelled.
Probably the idea that we've brought in these ideas of science fiction into our discussion is I don't think I don't think it's outside of the boundaries of what we've always kind of been moving towards. And I know we've always been moving towards this because, you know, Dick Tracy had a cartoon from the 30s, had a wrist. Well, basically, he had an Apple iWatch, right? Yep. And so now we've got the Apple iWatch. So we know that there are people who are visionaries that see what's going to happen in the future, and they understand that these are the kinds of things that would be cool.
No, absolutely, and it's better to think about these things before they start happening.
And right, and so by doing that, what we do is we can compress that latency timeline, and by compressing that latency timeline, we have to ordinarily think about different ways in which we can use the economy, because it requires different thinking than just, you know, supply and demand curve or, you know, production possibility frontier curves.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's even more critical than that. I mean, if you just look at the last 2 centuries worth of innovation and how much life has changed, I mean, it's been a literal revolution after revolution after revolution.
Absolutely. I think we're living in an age right now where we have the potential to move beyond kind of this this crop growing monoculture of economies, and using economies of scale that have a whole lot of waste, that have inefficient supply chains, that create surpluses, and that then have polluted the environment, given us high greenhouse gas emissions. If we decoupled from that, and I think we're seeing some of these effects during COVID-19, that we now have to start thinking about new ways of looking at technology. We have to have a new way of looking at the economy. We have to have a new way of responding to a virus that has the potential to kill many millions of people.
Okay. And so do you think that, this is kind of a hard question, hard thing to answer, but I mean, depending on how long the pandemic lasts, I mean, do you see any changes that will be sustained afterwards?
I can be speculative. You know, I do. I think that there will be a movement towards alternative economies, and by alternative economies, I don't mean Bitcoin or anything like that, because I think electronic currencies, while they might have their place, still won't replace the kinds of currencies that we have today. Even if they're in a currency union like the EU, or even if the Federal Reserve decided that they were going to create their own digital currency, I think that the idea of decentralization of that economy is probably not really a decentralization. What it really is creating a new centralization, so a kind of a re-centralization somewhere else. So what I think we really need to do is think about what the relationship is between the social good that an economy gives. I mean, it is economics is still a humanity. I mean, as the last time I looked at the university curriculum, it's still under the social sciences mostly, right? Yeah.
I mean, as somebody who studied economics, and I know you did as well, I mean, I think that's where economics shines, is in the humanities, not in the sciences.
Right. And so, we've been called the dismal science before as well. And having come from the hard sciences and then, or the physical sciences, and then gone into the social sciences, for me, it's been a wake-up call for me, right? But the rigor is still there. The methodology is still pretty much the same. You still need scientific rigor. You still needs to be, that methodology still needs to remain. But on the other hand, we need to start thinking about, well, okay, what happens when we start thinking about new ways of creating economies that will fit the future rather than fit our own current narrative about how economies should work.
And so how would you go about ushering in those new economies? I mean, would you try to get out ahead of it, pass laws, pass regulations that would help support that? Would you allow it to just naturally occur?
Again, the idea that economies produce a social good should be at the forefront of how we think about economies, rather than about the monetary side of the economy, which is plagued with all kinds of disparities and other judgments, right? There's a lot of baggage that goes with that, whether you're, some people ascribe to being a socialist, other people ascribe to being a libertarian, and they believe in small government, and they believe that those governments should not have any regulation over the exchange of capital. So we have, neither one is going to be satisfied. I think what we need to do is actually think of something else.
What would that something else be?
I don't know. I mean, like I said, I could be speculative about it. And I think
please do.
Okay, well, I think that maybe we need to think about decoupling economy and politics. So I studied.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, that's true. So I studied a class of political economy once, it was taught by, ironically, neoliberal economics was taught by a Marxist. I actually think that was actually probably a good thing, because I've definitely got a really good broad perspective of thought in the class. And there was a lot of resistance in the class, but the first day of class, because it was American political economy that we were taught, this class was American political economy. The first thing was that, essentially about taxes, tax policy, and why we raise revenue through taxes. And so the first day of class, we come in and we sit down, and then the first sentence is that taxes aren't necessarily a product of raising revenue. They are a way of binding the individual to the state. Now, if we look at it through that lens, it changes the whole perspective of things, right? It changes the idea of dumping tea into a harbour because you don't want to pay the taxes, because you don't want to pay the taxes to a particular state. So then what it's really saying is that you're decoupling that social order of supporting that state through the taxation system. So taxation without representation then becomes a myth. Sorry, I know that's going to sound strange coming from an Australian to an American audience, but it is. And so then you have to start thinking about, well, then what does it really mean? Who is the one who benefits ultimately from that new narrative? And you know, I've heard similar kinds of reactions when people go into they want to study instead of studying theology, they study divinity. They study theology at a university. So they go off to, you know, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and there they encounter someone like Bart Ehrman, right? And Bart Ehrman says, we're going to teach you the historic cultural aspects of the Bible. So then that way we'll look at it through a completely different lens. And so what they've done is effectively decoupled it from any spirituality that comes with it. I think we need to do the same thing with economies. We need to decouple the spirituality of, you know, this kind of civic religion, if you like, this economic religion, and we need to decouple ourselves from that in a few ways, you know, not least of which the idea of labor and reward, not just looking at hierarchies and what those hierarchies are actually doing, but we need to actually look beyond that. We actually think to ourselves, well, okay, if we're thinking about the future and we're thinking about, you know, robots replacing most of our jobs, I mean, let's face it, 90% of our jobs could be replaced. Even lab technicians could be replaced. So if that's the case, there's very few of us are actually going to be working. What does that mean? What does that mean for taxation policy? You can't tax the robots. We could, but what does it mean for taxation policy? I mean, I don't care if the robot's taxed. Tax them, right?
Yeah.
So how, if people ask the question, who's going to pay for this, then if you look at it from that future perspective, it's a really kind of a silly question to ask, because the system will ultimately pay for itself.
Right, just because there's an overabundance of everything, and
there's a post-scarcity about it. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So it's just everything is supplied for, and then you and we can pursue our other goals.
Pursue all our other goals. In fact, isn't that really what kind of robots are meant to do for us? Meant to do all of our jobs for us so that we can go and pursue things like, you know, being that awesome skateboarder that we wanted to be, or, you know, number one Nathan's hot dog eater. I mean, you know, we could do whatever, right?
Yeah. They'd be replicated hot dogs at that point, right?
They'd be replicated hot dogs at that point. You're absolutely correct. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So I think we're nearing the end of our time here. Do you have anything else you'd like to share? Any place you want people to go to find out more about you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I actually welcome people to find me on LinkedIn. I'm usually posting a whole lot of strange stuff and scientific discovery on social media, all platforms. And I'm looking at, you know, alternative economies and looking at how startups can exploit those in ways that could be positive. You know, we have a good list of, I think we've amassed about 200 or so different kinds of business models in our accelerator that we can cherry pick for startups. And I think that's more than the 4 or 5 that most people know. And so we can look at these economies in a real way in order to find ways in which startups can make revenue and then commercialize very valuable discoveries, science discoveries, and put them into the environment where people can use them.
Do you have like a single document with all those different business models that you promote?
I do. They're somewhat proprietary, but you know.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
I think that's what differentiates us from the rest of the market, don't you?
Well, but I mean, knowledge. We're kind of in a post scarcity world when it comes to knowledge, aren't we?
We are. I don't think that I'm hiding anything by although I keep these to myself. Well, I will keep these to myself. Then it's not as though you can't look up what a hire purchase model looks like in a textbook that at least dates back to, you know, at least has some of those models in it that date back to the 1940s. Yes. Yeah. Layaway is another is another example of a business model. It has worked in the past. There's no reason why it can't work in the future. I think that the problem is that people aren't creative enough to rework the work.
Yeah, and then somebody's going to figure it out. Some kid who's dropped out from Stanford will figure it out, start a company,
and maybe use hire purchase as a way to do something a little bit more advanced than just furniture and televisions, like what your grandparents used to buy with hire purchase in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, people still need to sit.
They still need to sit. So maybe, I think we need a fundamental re-exploration of the business models that are out there. That's what we did. So yeah. They're available. You just have to get a couple of textbooks and list them all. So, put them in a spreadsheet. It's an easy way of doing it.
Oh, but that's work.
Hey,
you just talked about the post-work world.
No, I didn't say a post-work world. I just said that we need to decouple labor and reward. I mean, I think there's a lot of downstream effect from me creating this spreadsheet, my own spreadsheet of different business models, but that's its own reward. The startups really are the ones who are going to get most of this as a monetary reward. Let me tell you.
Oh hell yeah! So would you qualify yourself as like a seed stage investor?
And we are. Although I don't actually think of myself as an investor so much as my LPs are doing the investing, right? We're just making the decisions on what other wiser investments to make within a portfolio of startup companies. So, so having a fund and being an investor, I think, are two different things. And we see a fund as being something that fundamentally helps the startup compress that latency, that market latency, that demand latency, and to help them get traction in the market, through pilot projects or purchases and through revenue. Yeah.
All right. Well, I am disappointed that we're not going to be able to share what we talked about before the interview started, but everything after it was
maybe we should leave that for another interview.
Oh, hey, I'm up for posting that, but
well, look, just so that everyone knows, it was about stem cell grown lab meat.
Yeah.
So
and then let your imagination run wild.
And let your imagination absolutely run wild. I'm sure everyone can. Thanks, Joe.
If they've stuck around to this point, they could figure out what we were talking about.
I think so.
All right. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thanks.